Hi, my name is Mariah Karina, and I want to talk with you guys today about something that I love and that I study called Processwork, or process-oriented psychology, because my school, the Processwork Institute, is accepting applications for their master's program coming up this October 2017. So I'm here in the woods, in the hills above the school in Northwest Portland to tell you a little bit more about it. And Processwork is a little bit difficult to explain, which is one of its weaknesses, but it's actually also a strength, because one of the things about it is that it's wide enough to cover the full spectrum of human experience and provide us with tools to engage with what's going on, to understand what's going on better, and to act in deeper accordance with our true selves. And because of that, it necessarily has to be very broad and very open. And it's open enough for each person who studies it to find themselves within it and to find their authentic way through life with these tools and practices that can greatly enhance and enrich our ability to do so. And in that way, process work connects to kind of these mythic stories of our life. It connects to this larger sense of who we are. And so I thought instead of trying to describe what process work is, I could tell a little bit of my story, and that might give you an idea of what process work is for me. So I grew up in a Jewish home. I'm from a Jewish background, and also in a very political home. My parents were activists. Some of their family was very conservative. My brother was very conservative. And so political issues were always the number one bit of contention around the dinner table. And when I was 18 years old, I was a little bit wild, which, at the time meant for me that I wrote a lot of romantic tragedy-themed poetry, which I still do, and drank a lot of vodka, which I don't do anymore. And it also meant that when I was 18 and I graduated high school, there was a situation happening in Palestine and Israel called the Second Intifada, where the Palestinian people were rising up and leading a resistance movement against Israel and the control and security and surveillance that the Israeli state puts on the people in the West Bank and Gaza of the Palestinian territories. And because I was wild and because I came from the background that I did, I decided not to go to college and instead went to the West Bank to work with an international solidarity organization that supported Palestinian-led direct action in favor of the Second Intifada, and also did international observation and Human Rights Watch. And because of this choice, I was actually put right in the heart of some of the most intense conflicts that were happening in the West Bank during the Second Intifada. And I stood in front of bulldozers and was a human shield in front of guns, and saw a lot of really horrific and violent things that I wasn't prepared for. And in this way, I think the experience was actually a little bit traumatizing to be exposed to that level of violence, but also tremendously empowering to feel so important, to feel so useful, and to find my own strength in it. But I think the most intense moment for me actually came not from being in the face of actual violence, but from strongly feeling the violence inside myself. There's this one day, we were there during the olive harvest, and there were a lot of times when the Israeli military wouldn't let people in to harvest their olives. And what we would do as international observers would be to negotiate with the military to allow the Palestinian farmers access to their fields so that their olives wouldn't rot and they'd be able to make their livelihood. And without going into too much detail, there were also these settlers that were sort of allowed to go wherever they wanted and do whatever they wanted. And there was this one situation where we were negotiating for almost a week for this elderly Palestinian family to be able to gain access to their olive fields, and were consistently being denied. And then after a week, our negotiations were successful and we got them in and we were harvesting olives. And this Israeli settler came on the road with a gun and with his sheep, and he was having his sheep and goats just poop all over the fields while we were trying to harvest them. And he started giving us this lecture about how Jewish people were the light of the world. And part of what was so confusing to me during that time was that I was there supporting the Palestinian side, and yet I identified very much as Jewish. and had a lot of love for my family and for certain elements of that culture of humanitarianism and Sunday brunch and the value of family in the world. And so to see some of the culture that has become part of the Israeli sense of being, which felt so different than that to me, was painful. And I didn't always know where I stood. And so to hear this man talking about how Jewish people had this opportunity to make this great example, I agreed with. But the fact that he was tying it to Israel being successful and Israel pushing out this Arab threat and being the light of the world and being this model for all to see, especially after all that I had seen Israel was doing, it just shook me to my core. And I got all up in this man's face and I started yelling at him and cursing him out. You foul fuck, you shame of the world. Like, you are everything that's wrong. And, with a lot of more colorful language. And what happened inside me is that I felt the desire to kill him. I don't mean theoretically. I don't mean in the way that we can all kind of understand that feeling. I meant literally, I had to hold myself back from grabbing his gun and shooting him in the face. And this feeling inside me, encountering the killer inside me, scarred me more deeply than any of the killer that I had found outside. Because in that flash of a moment, I understood that I was the same as him. That I wanted to protect my people the same as he wanted to protect him. I saw how this conflict that was cycling in this area between Palestinians and Israelis was possible because I felt that absolute disgust, rage, disdain, and need to destroy the other side for the injustices that they had caused to me. And this changed me forever. And when I came back to the United States, I decided to put all of my energy into my brain and the activist activities I could do, which meant two things. It meant, one, I got very, very into academia and social theory, and it meant that I completely dedicated myself to my activism around Israel and Palestine, the genocide in Sudan, around immigration and what was going on with the femicide, is what it was called, in Juarez. I mean, take your pick. There are more than enough issues to choose from if you're going to work yourself to the bone doing it. But doing those things, I encountered the problem, which is that I was working myself to the bone and never felt like I was doing enough, was smart enough, was dedicated enough, was achieving enough, and sometimes didn't even understand what I was working for. And I would look at my activist self and know that I was always a hair's breadth away from burnout. And that the struggle that I was feeling outside with these larger systemic forces, I was also feeling inside with myself, and was full of so much disdain for what I viewed as my shortcomings, because I linked them to my worthiness. As in, I was worthy in as much as I could effectively organize, and that seemed absolutely impossible in the way that I was doing it. And then the other thing is I got very into academia, but I couldn't talk to anybody about these ideas that I cared so much about. And even though they'd become this lens that I interpreted the world with, they didn't actually enter into or give any guidance for my personal interactions or how to live my life. Another thing is I had this paper that was accepted into a conference, and I went to that conference and I realized that all of these people, while they were very, very smart, didn't seem very happy. And it didn't seem like their intellect was giving them any more ideas about how to live in a balanced, harmonious, and effective way than mine was. And so I was working on my thesis in something called cyborg anthropology, and I was really trying to understand, okay, there's all these bad things happening, but there are also all these good things happening. And is there a way that all these good things can form together to create a comprehensive global system that actually begins at present circumstances and indicates a model of social change that will lead towards our eventual vision of what we're working towards? And I think that that's a huge part of what I had really lost in my activist activities, is what was I actually working for in an overall big picture sense? Not this little piece or this tiny victory or that campaign, but really what does a more better world look like? And so I threw myself into this thesis project, filled up 3 notebooks, did countless interviews, did all this field investigation, and I started having straight up visions. Like, no joke, I would be falling asleep and I would get these images while I was still awake. And I saw the world as this comprehensive global system, as this singular creature that we're all a part of it, and of the value of consciousness and the importance of love, that love is what connects us, and that when we act, we say we're acting from ideas or from moral stances, but really we're acting based on our emotional histories. And really what changes us is this substrata of our felt emotional experience. And in the deepest sense I can possibly explain, that we are all in this together. That it can't be one person's victory over another. That just like we are on one planet, the process towards finding solutions needs to include everybody. And not because one person is more right or more wrong. And while that might be the case, it also has to acknowledge that felt emotional experience of everyone involved for us to be able to move forward effectively. And what gave me the detachment to be able to see this and build compassion for all the multiple players that create a situation was a sense to something larger that felt transcendent and also spiritual. And even though I'd grown up in a Jewish home, spirituality wasn't really allowed there. And definitely in activist circles, I think a lot of times what's fueling us is this sense of being on the right side of history, of being part of movements, of being a part of something greater. But a lot of times the spiritual or God is explicitly left out of what that something greater means. And so here I had found this experience of God, and it really estranged me from my intellectual friends, from my activist friends, from my family, and set me on a different path. And so I started exploring healing arts and energy and different dimensions and soul retrieval and past lives and all kinds of really fun stuff that just filled up and nourished this part of me that I realized had been longing for that for so long, and then that had gone looking for that in all of these places, including vodka and romantic tragic poetry. And now it was accessible to me all the time through this language of spirituality that I'd shunned, that was now filling me. And I found new friends and all sorts of other activities and tantra, and man, oh man, it was a lot of fun. But I started to look around at my life and what I was doing and the new relationships that I'd made, and I'd realized that it also felt not quite right, because the new friends that I had, while they knew a whole lot about spiritual stuff and healing and different dimensions, didn't always consider a social perspective on the world, and weren't always so kind even to the darker side of life, to depression and pain and heartbreak and alienation and things that I've always felt personal experience with, and also just a tender place in my heart and being for that part of the human journey as well. And so I was kind of in a crisis again. I didn't know how to be all the parts of myself, how to live all the parts of myself, and I didn't know what to do in the world that would be reflective of all these different parts. You know, I didn't want to just work for the ACLU. I didn't want to just be a healer. I didn't want to just be, you know, writing sad songs, and I didn't want to just be espousing positive affirmations all the time. And that is when, through a magic chain of synchronicity, I found something called Processwork. And there's a bunch of stories that led me to it, this sort of like not very well known area of study that blends together psychology, quantum physics, Taoism, alchemy, and a bunch of other traditions into this really dynamic way of working with and understanding reality. And when I found this, one of the first things that I saw is they had this tree that represented all the different areas that people have been classically known to work with in process work. and one was social issues, and one was health and body symptoms, illness. One was birth and dying. Another one was mystic or altered states, or even extreme states, which are different, like further on down the spectrum of what mainstream society calls mental illness or psychosis. There was looking at addiction, relationships, individual therapy. There was a whole thing that was connected to earth-based spirituality. There was another that was connected with this more quantum sense of non-local dreaming and connection to the sky and the stars. And it was this entire world of people who had dedicated themselves to finding tools to address the full spectrum of what we go through as human beings. And in this community, I found not only people that encouraged me to be all of myself and my authentic self, even the nasty, ugly parts that I don't like, which I found out after going through the program was a lot of them. And it's also a community of people who are smart in all of these ways that matter, that have insight and wisdom in all of these practical applications that you can immediately use to address the situation. I was looking for something that could address the killer in me as well as the social activist, the healer in me as well as the addict, the mystic, the artist. And a huge part of it came down to a fundamental understanding of this approach that lets you see this holistic vision of what is happening, right? Like, what is actually happening? Radical questions like, what am I actually feeling? Radical beliefs like to trust my own experience and to lead from that place. You know, I'd been operating from my mind and from my morality and from other people's minds and moralities for so long. And in Processwork, I found something that fully, completely believed in my own experience and gave me the tools and support to go inside, to find out who I was, what I wanted, what my piece of the whole picture of what was going on was, and then gave me like a priceless training from master teachers about how to actually work with that in the world, in myself and with other people. It has enriched my life in so many ways. I think it makes my life better a million times a day. It works not only on problems you may have, but also what you might be attracted to. You know, it works not only in your inner psyche, but in the physical world, unfolding your connection to the earth and other people, finding the essence within you when we do believe in something passionately, or when we are moved to do something creatively. And I am so thankful. I'm so thankful to have found this paradigm, and I'm so thankful to have found this community of people. There's one school here in the United States, and there's international schools all over the world, you know, who meet up for conferences and in online groups. And that to me is also incredible. I mean, to be with a Spanish priest and a Nigerian nun and a corporate banker from South Africa and a movie star from Poland, and to be working through our collective psyches together is something that is a fountain of great joy for me. And as the whole process of learning has been, you know, I never thought I would go to a school that every assignment that I do feels like it's really for me, you know, that I'm really there learning this for me, and that's the understanding of the teachers and the administration and the other students, is that we're all here to help each other on our journey of self-discovery and self-empowerment, and to do so more effectively, efficiently, and joyfully. So that's my plug. As you can tell, I'm really passionate, and I really love it. And if you have any questions, you can contact the outreach people or me. I'd be happy to talk to you about it all day, as I'm sure you can tell. All right. Thanks so much for listening, and so much love.